That video made me tear up a little bit. I don't know about you when I first watched it. And, honor to thy Father. What a good message for us to have. For those of you who still have your dad, I hope you will show him some special love today. Now, for some of you, I know that today is a difficult day, especially if your dad is no longer with you. My dad passed away 8 years ago. And it's sad to know that I won't be talking to him today. For some of you, I know for a variety of reasons, your dad wasn't all that he should have been. And for you, I want you to know that I feel for you today. You see, God's plan is for us to have both mothers and fathers who give us a physical example of God himself. God created us, man and woman, in his image. And he created us to be together to provide for you the image, an initial image of who God is. And when we don't have that, then we miss out on, I think, a beautiful opportunity to see a glimpse of God. So my point today is that regardless of the kind of dad that you had or have, I want you to know that ultimately your Father in heaven loves you more than anyone in this world ever has or ever will. And I want you to know that ultimately that your Father in heaven wants you to feel his presence today. And so my hope is that you'll truly experience his love and grace for you. So today for our text, what we're going to do is I want to look at one of the best pictures, I think, of God's love in the whole Bible, and it's from Luke 15. If you have a Bible or the sermon notes, then go ahead and turn there. For some of you, you will recognize this as the parable of the prodigal son. It's interesting that whether you've been a regular church attender or not, you've probably heard of the prodigal son. I mean, it's such a part of the fabric of culture, right? The prodigal son. We always talk about that the wayward child, right? The prodigal son. And while the prodigal son gets a lot of the attention, particularly when we talk about this story is really about two very different sons and their dad. And for me, the dad is the important person in this story. And so for me, I think if I were to be given the right to name this story, I'll call it the parable of the gracious father. Because that's what it is. And that's what we want to sort of focus on today. So regardless of what you call it, here we go. Starting in verse 11, Luke chapter 15. And Jesus said, a man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country. And there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now, we don't know how long any of this took. It happens in a very short description here, but it's very straightforward, right? The younger of the two sons just wants to get his inheritance now. He doesn't want to wait. And so he gets it and he goes off and he chases his dreams, or we presume that that's what he's doing. Unfortunately, chasing his dreams didn't work out too well for him, though. I mean, he kind of hit a wall in this whole thing. Now, for some of us in this room, this is the part of the story that kind of hits close to home. I mean, we've seen that in our own lives or in the lives of those around us. Some of us, including me, have had a significant period of our lives that we've been running away from God during a good part of our life. By the way, in case you haven't figured it out, in a parable, there is a representation of God and a representation of us. And in this one, it's pretty easy. The father in this story represents God the Father, and the two sons represent each of us in one way or another. So let's keep moving. Verse 14. Now when he had spent everything, and a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. Pretty safe to say this young man hit rock bottom, right? The fact that this was a pig pen is very important. You see, Jews saw swine as unclean animals, and to gladly eat what he was feeding them, that's about as low as you can get. I mean, you just can't imagine a more lower position to be in. Now, before I go any further, it's important for us to understand that Jesus was telling this story also to a Jewish audience, and they were probably in judgment really quickly of this young man, thinking that he got what he deserved. Okay, let's keep moving. Verse 17. But when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men." So he got up, and he came to his father. Don't you love it when someone you love comes to their senses? I mean, we have stories of that, and it's a beautiful thing when they come to their senses. And don't you just love it when they realize that they've been chasing the wrong thing? Listen, sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes it's after hitting rock bottom, like this guy. It's also interesting to note that the young man was Jewish, and he knew the consequences. He knew what to expect when he got home. And just like those who were listening knew the consequences, he knew that he was no longer worthy to be called his dad's son. So he was just hoping that his dad would just hire him back. So what did he do? He had this imaginary conversation with his dad, and he knew it would be a tough conversation, right? And listen, for most of us, I think when we are going through a tough conversation or going through a tough time or whatever, we do the same thing. We have this imaginary conversation and stuff. We go over in our minds, well, I'm going to say this, and then they'll say this, and then I'm going to say this, and then they're going to say this. I mean, we have that sort of, dialogue that we're trying to do. And if you're the father, how would you react? Probably the way the son was expecting him to act. I told you so. But you want to check this out. Verse 20b. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, he wasn't listening to him, right? He said to his servants, quickly bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hands and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. Much to this young man's surprise, and I'm sure much to the shock of the Jewish audience that was listening to Jesus, the father ran to greet him with great joy. Now, he didn't wait to hear his son ask for forgiveness. He didn't wait to hear his son had shown some kind of change of heart. He didn't even give him time to recite the story of repentance that he had talked about. He said, get him the best clothes and shoes, and put a signet ring on his finger. Listen, each one of those things demonstrates that he was totally and completely back in the family. And on top of all that stuff, he threw this epic party, right? Just this party to beat all parties, and they party big time. Listen, his father showed what it is like to truly have true unconditional love for his son. He demonstrated that his son's actions had absolutely no bearing on his love and acceptance. Now, imagine being the son, and imagine being someone in the Jewish audience listening to this. No doubt the son had experienced what grace is all about. Not only did he not get what he deserved, which is servanthood, right? That's what he really deserved. But he got what he did not deserve, which is a return to full standing as a son. That's amazing grace. I don't know if you ever heard me do this little definition before, but the definition I like to give, we're not quite there yet, but you can hold on, but whatever. But the story, the thing that I like to talk about is there's fairness, there's mercy, and there's grace. Fairness is what we kind of all want, right? I always say, I want fairness, I want fairness. Listen, We don't want fairness with God. A holy God and an unholy person, it's not a good place to be. What we want, right? Mercy. Mercy means is that he doesn't give you what you deserve. That's what mercy is. But grace is even better. It's you get what you don't deserve, which is his love. That is what's amazing about grace. And so he got this, amazing grace. And this story reveals, I think, a lot about how God celebrates when somebody becomes broken to themselves and turns to him. But here's the deal. God is always going to let us choose our path, no matter how painful it is. You see, for some of us, it takes some amount of pain before we can truly experience and know grace. In fact, I believe that one of the most important things about God is understanding his grace. I have, because I have run from God so much, I've experienced so much of his grace. I'm a grace junkie. I'm just so overwhelmed by his grace. Overwhelmed by how much he gives me that I don't deserve. It is so amazing to me. And listen, it can't be just grace in your head. It's got to be grace that's in your soul, in your heart. Because listen, and here's the principle that we had up there. We'll go back to it. Here's the principle I want you to understand about God. Is that when you have truly experienced grace, you'll know it because you have grace for others, not judgment. That's when you'll see it. You'll like, so like I'm telling you, if you go through and somebody does something and this happens and stuff, and you're like, I'm judging them. I want you to back up for a moment and go, listen, Jesus, I'm sorry. I know there's work to be done in me. Would you give me the grace that you have for me, that I might have it for others? Because that's where it shows, is when that happens. You see, when grace is just something we know about, then we tend to be judgmental and prideful. That has been a sad place, I think, for a lot of Christians that have been over the years. But people who mean well, they just don't get it. They know about grace. They just don't have grace. They know about it, but they don't have it. Grace is something you have to experience. You can't just hear about it. And that's what happened to the younger son. He learned through the school of hard knocks that his pain was insignificant in comparison to his reward of being a child of the Father. He had to experience the low in order to experience the high. And the reality that if someone had helped him when he was at his low, then he probably would not have even come to the point of brokenness that he came to. And so that's another, I think, important thing that we need to understand in experiencing grace. You have to become broken to yourself, to that. Broken to depending on yourself, broken to centering everything around yourself, broken to putting yourself first, broken to thinking you know everything, broken to thinking that you are better than anybody. Broken to yourself. And for this young man, he needed to experience the pain in order to become broken to himself. And thus experience grace. Just a little side note. I, like some of you, was a prodigal son for many years. I ran away from the church. The reason I did, or at least one of the reasons I did, is because church just didn't seem to meet my needs, right? It wasn't what I expected it to be. People were letting me down. They weren't who they said they were. They were acting phony, all the things and stuff. And at the end of the day, what I was, it was very selfishly motivated. You see, I wanted a church that served me, not a church that served God. I wanted a church that worshiped the God created in my image, not a church that worshiped the God who created me in his image. Anyway, just like the prodigal son, I didn't find any help outside the church to meet my needs either. No, I thought there were times that I was being met, my needs were even met, But those things, money, friends, material things, travel, et cetera, just kept coming up empty in my life. And there's no doubt in my mind that God allowed those things to happen in my life because he knew that's what it would take to bring me to a place of brokenness and understanding grace. In other words, I needed church during those years. However, being away from the church taught me things that I don't know that I would have ever experienced if I had been in the church. Now, I'm not trying to get anybody to leave the church. I'm not saying, well, I don't know, maybe that's what I do. No, I'm not trying to get that. But if you're here, if you're just in church to see more of you rather than more of God, then you need to rethink things. You see, I needed church, but I needed the lack of church even more. Just like the prodigal son needed food, but he needed an empty belly even more. And when that happened, well, he came up with the plan, right, to go back to his dad and to admit that he had blown it and that he was no longer worthy of being his son. No doubt he had blown it. And here's a big problem for most of us. We don't determine our worthiness. God does. It is in this boss-employee relationship that we're so accustomed to in our world. Worth is something that's based on performance, right? But in a true parent-child relationship, a father-child, a mother-child relationship, worth is a birthright, okay? And the birthright of an adopted child is no different than the birthright of a naturally born child. We are adopted into God's family and we have that same birthright. Listen, this is where I believe most Christians are. They have failed as a Christian for one reason or another to commit to never fail again. Only to do what? Fail again. They're living a boss-employee relationship with God rather than a father-child relationship. And God wants us to see that when we have put our trust in him first, when we put our trust in his son, in life through his son, then we are his children. Now, let's go back to that passage just real quick, just to look one more time at the younger son. When he came home, what happened? The Bible says that the son was a long way off. The father saw him and had compassion, and his emotions erupted. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't mad. And he ran to hug and kiss his son. Did the son deserve the response from the father? Well, in our world, he did. I mean, he deserved to be rejected, right? But in God's world, absolutely, he got what God gives, his grace. The son deserved it because he was his son. That's why he got that. The father was accepting him for who he was, not what he had done. And don't miss that. Now let's look at the older son, the second son in this. Starting in verse 25, it says, "Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound.'" Verse 28, "But he became angry and was not willing to go in, and his father came out and began pleading with him. And he answered and said to his father, 'Look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours, and yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends.'" There's a lot going on in here, and I don't have time to break it all down, but I want you to see something very, very important. The older brother just simply doesn't show any love for anyone. His father, his brother, or whatever. He was living, the older son was living very much in this boss-employee relationship, right? Or trying to earn the father's blessing. And when you, and I live in that, that's what happens. And so when he saw how this lousy brother of his was being treated, he couldn't stand it. It was just, too much. And the reality is that this was his brother, and he should have been rejoicing with his father. The crazy thing is this happens so many times to us. How many times have you seen another person doing well? And you feel like you have been more faithful and obedient, and things haven't gone as well for you. But instead of rejoicing for them, rejoicing that things have gone well for them, we become jealous, right? And turn it back to me. So we can see how easy it is for this to happen. He is just trying to be obedient to earn the Father's love, and we have to be careful that we don't do the same thing. Check this out, verse 30. But when his son, this son of yours, I love the way he says it, but when this son of yours, who has devoured your wealth and prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live, and was lost and has been found. Again, the elder son was trying to be accepted by being good, by his actions and stuff. And the reality is that we have a lot of people in the world who think that is the way God works, that that's what he wants us to do, right? That's why every other religion has a list of things you can and cannot do. But that's not what Christianity is about. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who put Christianity in that category. I've had people who don't know much about Christianity explain to me Christianity with the list of do's and don'ts. That's what everybody else sort of feels like it's supposed to be. And until you've come to the place of really experiencing grace, it's easy to fall into that trap. But thankfully, and listen, one of my big problems with church, again, was the thought that, I had to be better and I had to live up to some high moral standard and all that kind of stuff. But thankfully, I finally understood that God's love is unconditional. And in this story, the father was trying to get the older brother to understand that all that he had, all he had was his, and that he didn't have to do anything to earn any of it. You see, in the world system, it's all about performance, right? But in God's system, it's all about grace. The young son was celebrated because he was broken to himself. And that is where he learned what love and grace was. Do you understand that you cannot earn what is already yours? It's already yours. It's already been given to you. All that is Christ's is yours. To the older son, the father made it clear that he was trying to earn something that was already his. The older son was never broken and never experienced that. And that's the way the story is. You see, Jesus didn't tell his audience what happened to the older brother. He's sort of left it to, in fact, Jesus did that, I think, so that the people that were listening, the church people that were listening of their day, are left to answer it for themselves. And you and I are left to answer it for ourselves. But he has given us such a clear understanding through this parable of what grace is and what trying to earn God's love is. And so if you've truly experienced God's grace, I want that to be the question you leave today. Have I fully experienced God's grace? And just like I said, the way you're going to know that you fully experienced God's grace is because you used to have grace for others that are hard to have grace for. Now, does that mean that somehow or another you've fallen short or God's mad at you or whatever? If that's the case, no. That's what we do as we grow on a spiritual journey. We learn from that. There's no condemnation that comes in that. There's no, woe is me. I didn't have grace for this person. No. This is not a story of condemnation at all. It's a story for us to be able to reflect on and to understand on and just be aware of. One of the greatest things I think that happens in anybody's life is when your eyes are open to something that's not of God. Because he's showing you something that he's still working on. If you continue going through and go, yeah, la-di-da-da-da, I have grace for everybody, I got grace for everybody, I love everybody, and this, and you know, that's your attitude and so forth, and somebody comes into your life that you have a hard time with, now you're at a crossroad, right? It's like, wow, that's not me. I actually have grace, even though you didn't in your heart. You're like, you become like a church person, put on that outside cover and that face and make everybody think that you did, but you didn't. Listen, we have an incredible God who loves us and has all this grace for us. And we have to truly experience that grace and allow it to rule over our life. Because without love and grace at the basis of what we do and what we say, we're going to be like the older brother. So my encouragement for you, my exhortation to you is experience God's grace. Embrace God's grace. Live a life of grace.